Hey guys, tonight we slip in the sandal-worn streets of ancient Rome, where the air hums with ambition and the clink of chariot wheels. You're standing in the Forum, heart of the empire, surrounded by towering columns and toga-clad senators barking deals. The sun glints off golden statues, and the scent of fresh-baked bread mixes with incense from nearby temples. It's the peak of Rome's glory, around the 2nd century AD, when the empire sprawls from Britain's misty hills to Egypt's scorching sands. But even now, as you marvel at the grandeur, there's a faint tremor beneath your feet, a warning that this colossus might not stand forever. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive the political backstabbing or the lead-poisoned wine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off to this story. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Rome at its zenith, under the Pax Romana, a golden age of relative peace and prosperity. Emperor Trajan's markets buzz with traders hawking silk from China and spices from India. Aqueducts churn fresh water into fountains, and the Colosseum roars with crowds cheering gladiators. This is Rome at its most invincible, stretching over 5 million square kilometers, home to maybe 70 million souls. You can almost believe it'll last forever. But historians point to this moment as the high watermark, when the seeds of decline were already sown. The empire's vast size, for one, is a mainstream fact of its vulnerability, too sprawling to manage efficiently, with borders stretching thinner than a cheap toga. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Romans loved their garum, a pungent fish sauce slathered on everything from bread to peacock. Archaeologists have found garum factories across the empire, and some scholars say its trade was a backbone of Rome's economy. But as supply lines stretched, so did the cost of keeping elites hooked on their fishy ketchup. Over-reliance on luxuries like this left Rome's economy wobbly when crises hit. You can imagine a senator whining as his garum shipments delayed. Talk about a first world problem. Historians still argue whether Rome's peak was doomed by its own success. Did the empire overexpand, like a balloon ready to pop, or was it just bad luck later on? You're walking the Forum, dodging street vendors, and overhearing debates about taxes and frontier wars. The marble gleams, but the bureaucracy's creaking. Governors in far-off provinces are skimming funds, and the army's loyalty is starting to waver. You notice the statues, gods and emperors staring down with blank eyes. They seem eternal, but even now, some are chipped, their bases eroding in the rain. You pause by a temple where priests burn offerings to Jupiter. The smoke curls upward, but the crowd's thinner than it used to be. Whispers of new cults, like that Christian one, are spreading in the alleys. Rome's unity, its shared gods and values, feels less certain. You smirk, thinking how future hipsters might call this peak Rome vibes. All glory, no grit. But the grit's coming. The empire's built on conquest, and conquest needs cash, soldiers, and trust. Those are already running low, like a chariot low on axle grease. As you wander past a bathhouse, steam rising from its arches, you overhear a merchant griping about rising grain prices. The mob, Rome's restless underclass, depends on free bread to stay quiet. If the grain ships from Egypt ever stop, you're betting on riots. And those borders, the legions are spread thin, guarding against tribes with names like Goths and Vandals. You chuckle. Vandals sound like they'd key your chariot for fun. The sun's dipping now, painting the forum gold. You lean against a column, feeling its cool stone. This is Rome at its mightiest, but it's fragile. The empire's a machine, and machines break when the parts don't fit. You're not sure what'll crack first, money, faith, or swords, but you're certain it's coming. For now, you breathe in the chaos and splendor, knowing this moment won't last. You're trudging along a dusty road just beyond Rome's northern frontier, where the empire's grip feels more like a shaky handshake. The air's sharp with pine and the distant clang of swords. Legionaries march past, their sandals kicking up grit, but their faces are grim and their armors patched. It's the 3rd century AD now, and those barbarian shadows you heard whispers about in the forum are growing bolder. Tribes like the Goths and Alemanni aren't just raiding anymore. They're probing for weakness, and Rome's got plenty. You're out here, far from the marble city, where the empire's strength is tested not by speeches, but by blood and steel. The rot's setting in, and you can smell it, like damp wool left too long in the rain. The mainstream fact here is the crisis of the 3rd century, a 50-year mess where Rome nearly collapsed under barbarian invasions, civil wars, and economic collapse. Emperors were crowned and gutted faster than you can say, "Hail Caesar," some reigning mere weeks. The empire's borders, once ironclad, are now porous. You're standing near the Rhine, where Germanic tribes keep slipping through, torching villages and hauling off cattle. The legions stretch thinner than a tavern's watered-down wine, can't be everywhere at once. You overhear a centurion muttering about unpaid wages, loyalties fading, And it's not just the barbarians causing trouble. Rome's eating itself from within. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some barbarian tribes weren't just wrecking balls, they were Roman fangirls. Archaeologists have dug up Gothic settlements with Roman style pottery and coins, suggesting trade and mimicry. Some Goths even served as mercenaries in Rome's armies, learning its tactics before turning them against the empire. Imagine you're a Roman general, hiring a Goth to guard your fort, only to find him leading a raid next week. It's like lending your chariot to a guy who moonlights as a highway bandit. Historians still argue whether the barbarians were the disease or just a symptom. Were they the hammer smashing Rome's walls? Or was the empire already crumbling, inviting the chaos? You're watching a skirmish unfold. Legionaries lock shields against a wave of Alemanni warriors, their war cries echoing through the forest. The Romans hold, but barely, and you notice fewer soldiers than there should be. Back in Rome, senators are too busy plotting coups to send reinforcements. You smirk, thinking how this frontier scrap would barely make the news in the Forum, where they're still arguing over chariot race bets. You duck behind a crumbling watchtower, its stones mossy and neglected. The empire's spending a fortune on these forts, but they're understaffed, and the roads linking them are bandit-ridden. You recall that garum obsession from Rome's markets. Those fancy fish sauce shipments are still flowing, but the grain for soldiers' bread is often lost to corrupt officials. The system's creaking louder now, and you're starting to see why. Power's too centralized, yet too fractured. Emperors demand total control, but governors and generals are carving out their own fiefdoms. It's a recipe for chaos, like mixing oil and water and expecting soup. A cold wind cuts through your cloak as you spot a barbarian camp across the river. Its fires flickering like eyes in the dusk. You wonder if these tribes are as barbaric as Romans claim. They've got families, trade routes, even their own gods. Maybe they're just tired of Rome's tax collectors and swaggering legions. You chuckle. Imagine a Goth chieftain rolling his eyes at Roman bureaucracy, like you do at a long tavern tab. But the threat's real. Each raid chips away at Rome's aura of invincibility, and the empire's too distracted to plug the leaks. As night falls, you huddle by a legionary campfire, the soldiers' faces gaunt under their helmets. They're not fighting for glory anymore, just survival. You feel the weight of Rome's sprawl, too big to defend, too proud to shrink. The barbarians aren't the only shadows here. Doubt and decay are creeping closer. You're not sure how long this frontier will hold, but you're betting it won't be pretty when it breaks. You're slinking through the torchlit corridors of a Roman palace, the air thick with intrigue, and the faint tang of spilled wine. It's the late 3rd century AD, and the throne room's a revolving door for emperors who barely unpack before a dagger finds their back. You dodge a pair of Praetorian guards, their eyes cold as they whisper about the next change in management. The empire's heart is beating erratically now, and you're witnessing the chaos of emperors losing their grip, powers slipping like sand through a clenched fist, and Rome's grandeur feels more like a fading echo than a living force. You're in the thick of it, where loyalty's as rare as a sober bacchanal. The mainstream fact is that between 235 and 284 AD, Rome churned through over 20 emperors, many assassinated or overthrown in a brutal game of imperial musical chairs. The crisis of the 3rd century turned the throne into a cursed seat, with generals and usurpers declaring themselves emperor faster than you can carve a bust. You're watching a new guy, Probus, try to rally the Senate, but half the room's plotting his downfall before he finishes his speech. The Praetorians, once elite bodyguards, are now kingmakers, selling their swords to the highest bidder. It's a mess, and you're wondering how anyone gets any governing done between the coups. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some emperors tried to win loyalty with bizarre propaganda. Emperor Elagabalus, a short-lived teen ruler, supposedly scattered gold and jewels from his balcony to dazzle the mob, only to spark riots when people got trampled. Archaeologists have found coins with his face, minted in a frenzy to legitimize his rule, but they didn't save him from being murdered by his own guards. You smirk, imagining Elagabalus as a TikTok influencer of ancient Rome, tossing glitter for clout and getting canceled hard. Historians still argue whether the emperor churn was a cause or effect of Rome's decline. Did weak leadership break the empire, or was the empire already too fractured to support strong rulers? You're eavesdropping on a senator's hushed rant about barbarian invasions and tax shortages, but he's conveniently ignoring his own embezzlement schemes. The system's rotten. Emperors need armies to hold power. Armies need cash, and cash needs stable taxes, which nobody's paying. You're starting to see the vicious cycle, like a chariot wheel wobbling before it snaps. You slip into a courtyard where a general's being hailed as the next emperor, his soldiers banging shields in approval. But you notice the crowd's thin, and the cheers feel forced. This guy's got maybe a year before he's betrayed, and he knows it. You recall the forum's golden days, with its confident senators and garum-fueled markets. That unity's gone, replaced by factions and backroom deals. The empire's too big for one man to rule, yet every man wants to try. You chuckle. It's like signing up to captain a sinking ship. then arguing over the best deck chair. The palace walls are scratched with graffiti, some praising the new emperor, others cursing the last one. You trace a crude sketch of a gladiator, wondering if the mob outside cares who's in charge as long as the bread and circuses keep coming. But even that's faltering. Grain shipments are delayed, and the Colosseum's fights are half empty. The empire's not just losing emperors, it's losing trust. You overhear a servant whisper about a new religion, Christianity, gaining followers who refuse to worship the emperor as a god. That's another crack in the foundation, but you'll see more of that later. As you sneak past a banquet hall, the clink of goblets and forced laughter spill out. These elites are partying like Rome's still eternal. But you know better. The throne's a trap, and the empire's bleeding from 1,000 cuts, most of them self-inflicted. You're betting the next emperor won't last long, and you're not sure Rome can keep playing this game much longer. For now, you slip into the shadows, the weight of a crumbling empire heavy on your shoulders. You're weaving through Rome's crowded markets, the air heavy with the scent of overripe fruit and the jangle of coins that don't buy what they used to. It's the late 3rd century AD, and the empire's economic spiral is tightening like a noose. You clutch a handful of debased denarii, their silver content so low they feel like cheap trinkets. Merchants scowl as you haggle, their stalls half empty, and the mob's grumbling louder than usual. The golden age of Trajan's bustling trade feels like a distant memory, and you're stuck in a city where wealth is evaporating faster than a puddle in the forum. Rome's markets, once the empire's pulse, are choking on corruption and inflation. The mainstream fact is that Rome's economy tanked during the crisis of the 3rd century, with hyperinflation crippling trade and taxation failing to fund the empire's needs. Emperors, desperate for cash, minted coins with less silver, sparking price surges that made bread cost more than a soldier's monthly pay. You're at a baker's stall, watching a woman trade a bronze lamp for a loaf. Barter's back because coins are a joke. Tax collectors, often corrupt, squeeze provinces dry, but the money vanishes into military campaigns or senators' villas. The empire's bleeding gold, and you're feeling the pinch just trying to buy a fig. Here's a quirky tidbit. Romans sometimes used broken pottery as IOUs, called ostraca, when cash ran short. Archaeologists have found these shards with scribbled debts, like ancient post-it notes for unpaid wine tabs. You imagine a tavern keeper smashing a jug to write, "Gaius owes me 10 sesterces," and it's almost charming until you realize this was a sign of economic desperation. Barter and ostraca couldn't sustain an empire hooked on luxuries like that garum you smelled in the Forum's glory days. Rome's addicted to its own excess, and the bills due. Historians still argue whether economic collapse was the root of Rome's fall or a symptom of deeper flaws. Was it mismanagement by emperors, or were global trade disruptions, like piracy or barbarian raids, too much to handle? You're dodging a tax collector's glare, his ledger stuffed with bribes. Corruption's rampant. Officials skim taxes. Merchants hoard goods. And the poor riot when grain handouts stop. You recall the Forum's gleaming statues, now tarnished and neglected. Rome's wealth was built on conquest, but new territories dried up, and maintaining the empire's sprawl is like feeding a dragon with a teaspoon. You pause by a money changer's table, where a merchant's yelling about debased coins. He's not wrong. Your denarii are mostly copper, and prices are climbing daily. A loaf that cost 1 denarius a year ago now costs 50. You smirk, thinking how modern economists would have a field day with Rome's inflation charts. The mob's restless, and you hear chants for free bread, a reminder of how Rome keeps its poor quiet. But Egypt's grain ships are late again, delayed by storms or pirates. Without bread, the city could burn, and you're not keen on being here when it does. The market's chaos feels personal. You trade a cloak for some olives, but the merchant's muttering about quitting for a farm in Gaul. Everyone's hedging bets, and trust in the system's gone. You spot a senator's litter pass by, guarded by mercenaries. His wealth's intact, but for how long? The empire's economic engine is stuttering, and you're betting on more riots before things stabilize. You chuckle, imagining a Roman influencer whining, "Can't even afford garum anymore, had an empire problems." But the joke's on everyone. Rome's running out of fixes. As dusk settles, the market thins out, and you're left with worthless coins and a sinking feeling. The empire's not just broke, it's broken. Corruption, inflation, and greed are strangling the markets, and you're wondering how much longer Rome can limp along. You're not sure what's next, but you're certain it won't be cheap. For now, you slip into an alley, the weight of a failing economy, heavier than the coins in your pouch. You're standing in a dimly lit Roman alley, the flicker of oil lamps casting shadows on graffiti-covered walls. It's the early 4th century AD, and the empire's soul is shifting. You hear chants from a hidden gathering nearby, Christians whispering prayers to their singular God, defying the old pagan altars. The scent of incense lingers, but it's not just for Jupiter anymore. Rome's faith is fracturing, and you're caught in the cultural quake as Christianity clashes with the empire's ancient roots. The Forum's temples, once unquestioned, now compete with this new religion, and the tension's thicker than a senator's wine-soaked breath. You're watching a civilization wrestle with its identity, and it's not pretty. The mainstream fact is that Christianity's rise, especially after Emperor Constantine's conversion around 312 AD, reshaped Rome's cultural and political landscape. His Edict of Milan in 313 legalized Christian worship, flipping centuries of persecution into state-backed growth. You're passing a basilica under construction. Its cross-shaped design, a stark contrast to the pagan shrines nearby. Christians are no longer hiding in catacombs. They're preaching openly, and their numbers are swelling. This shift challenges Rome's unity, as traditionalists cling to gods like Mars, while emperors see Christianity as a glue to hold the fracturing empire together. You're wondering if it's too late for that. Here's a quirky tidbit. Early Christians used fish symbols as secret codes, scratched into walls or dirt to mark safe meeting spots. Archaeologists have found these ichthys signs across Rome, a quiet rebellion against pagan dominance. You spot one etched near a doorway and smirk. It's like an ancient bumper sticker for a faith that's now out in the open. But this fishy graffiti wasn't just cute. It signaled a cultural tide that drowned old rituals. Pagan priests are losing clout, and you can almost hear their complaints about kids these days abandoning the old gods. Historians still argue whether Christianity strengthened or weakened Rome. Did it unify the empire under a new moral code, or did it erode the martial spirit tied to pagan warrior gods? You're slipping past a temple to Apollo, its steps deserted except for a stray cat. Nearby, a Christian preacher draws a crowd, promising salvation over sacrifice. The old guard's furious. Pagan elites see this faith as a threat to their power, blaming it for everything from barbarian raids to bad harvests. You recall the forum's golden statues, now overshadowed by crosses. Rome's trying to marry its past to this new future, but the fit's awkward, like a toga on a gladiator. You pause in a plaza where a pagan festival's faltering. Fewer dancers, half-hearted offerings. The mob's distracted, whispering about Constantine's vision of a cross before his victory at Milvian Bridge. You chuckle, imagining a modern tabloid headline. Emperor says God DM'd him, wins battle. But the story's sticking, and it's changing Rome. Christians refuse to worship emperors as divine, which irks the palace, and their charity networks are outshining state welfare. The empire's bread handouts, already spotty, can't compete with church soup kitchens. You're betting the mob's loyalty is shifting, and fast. The alley's quieter now, but you feel the clash of worlds. A pagan priest glares at a Christian scribe copying texts, and you sense the old order slipping. Rome's always absorbed new cults, But this one's different. It's exclusive, demanding sole allegiance. You think back to the garum crazed markets, now struggling. This faith shift isn't helping economic woes. The empire's trying to reinvent itself, but you're not sure it can balance both gods and gold. You slip past the gathering, their hymns soft but defiant, faith's shaking Rome's foundations, and you're curious how deep the cracks will go. You're trudging along a muddy frontier path, your boots sinking as you march with a ragged Roman legion. It's the early 4th century AD, and the empire's military, once a gleaming war machine, is stumbling like a chariot with a broken wheel. The air's thick with the stink of sweat and rust, and the legionaries around you are gaunt, their shields dented, and their pay long overdue. Beyond the horizon, barbarian tribes, Goths, Vandals, you name it, are circling like wolves. Rome's legions are overstretched, underfunded, and fraying at the seams, and you're out here on the empire's crumbling edge, where glory's just a word in old poems. The mainstream fact is that Rome's military declined sharply by the 4th century, unable to sustain its vast borders. The empire's army, once 500,000 strong, is now a shadow, with legions reduced to skeleton crews and forts crumbling from neglect. You're near the Danube, where a Gothic raid could hit any moment. The soldiers grumble about empty supply wagons, grain scarce, and the garum they loved in better days is a distant dream. Recruitment so desperate that emperors are drafting barbarians who fight for coin, not Rome. You're watching a centurion drill a mix of locals and mercenaries, their discipline as shaky as the empire's budget. Here's a quirky tidbit. Roman soldiers sometimes wore socks with their sandals, as found in British Fort Diggs. Archaeologists uncovered these woolen foot warmers, proof that even Rome's toughest legionaries got chilly toes in northern outposts. You smirk, picturing a grizzled veteran pairing socks with his caligay, like an ancient dad at a barbecue. But this cozy detail hides a grim truth. Soldiers were under-equipped, and supply lines were so stretched that socks were a luxury. The empire's military was unraveling, and you're feeling it in the cold seeping through your cloak. Historians still argue whether military decline was due to internal failures or external pressures. Did Rome's reliance on barbarian recruits dilute its strength? Or were the legions doomed by emperors who couldn't pay them? You're dodging a pothole in the road, noticing the fort ahead is half repaired, its walls patched with scavenged stone. The empire's pouring gold into wars, but corruption siphons off half, and you recall the debased coins from Rome's markets, worthless for soldiers' wages. The legionaries' loyalty is waning. Some desert to join the very tribes they're fighting. It's a betrayal that stings like a bad tavern deal. You pause by a watchtower, its lone guard scanning the misty hills. He's young, barely trained, and you wonder if he'll bolt at the first war cry. The Empire's military doctrine, once a masterpiece of discipline, is crumbling. Legions are split into smaller units, scattered to plug leaks, but they're too weak to hold. You think back to the Forum's golden statues, now a fading memory. Rome's too broke to maintain its armies, let alone its pride. You chuckle, imagining a modern general tweeting, "Out of swords, send vibes, had legion life." But the humor fades fast. Another raid's coming, and this outpost might not survive. The wind carries a distant horn, and the legionaries tense, gripping their spears. You overhear a veteran whisper about Constantine's new Christian banners, meant to inspire. But most soldiers just want food and pay. The Empire's trying to rally, but its armies are bleeding out, stretched across a map too big to defend. You're betting this frontier won't hold much longer, and the thought chills you more than the damp. Rome's military was its backbone, but now it's brittle, and you're not sure how many more hits it can take. For now, you march on, the weight of a faltering empire heavy in every step. You're weaving through Rome's eerily quiet streets, the air thick with the stench of decay and fear. It's the mid-4th century AD, and plagues are ravaging the empire's core, turning bustling cities into ghost towns. You step over a discarded cloak, its owner likely claimed by the fever that's emptying homes and markets. The Tiber's sluggish flow mirrors the city's pulse, slow, faltering, sick. Temples are packed with desperate prayers, but the gods, pagan or Christian, seem deaf. You're in the heart of Rome, but it feels like a graveyard, and the empire's strength is bleeding out with every cough and shroud. The mainstream fact is that recurring plagues, like the Antonine Plague of the 2nd century and later outbreaks, decimated Rome's population, killing up to a third of its people at times. These diseases, likely smallpox or measles, spread along trade routes, gutting cities and legions alike. You're passing a tenement where a family huddles, their faces pale and eyes hollow. The empire's urban centers, once its pride, are now petri dishes. Farmers die, fields rot, and the grain shipments you worried about in the markets are barely trickling in. Rome's losing its people, and with them, its ability to function. Here's a quirky tidbit. Romans tried wild remedies, like wearing amulets made of dried toad or drinking gladiator blood, believing it could cure disease. Archaeologists have found these charms in plague-era graves, a desperate grasp at hope. You smirk, imagining a street vendor hawking authentic gladiator juice, like it's the latest superfood. But these quack cures did nothing. Plagues didn't care about superstition or status. Senators and slaves dropped alike, and your dodging doorways marked with chalk, signaling the dead inside. Rome's obsession with quick fixes, like its garum craze, feels painfully familiar. Historians still argue whether plagues were a primary driver of Rome's fall or just one of many blows. Did disease break the empire's spine, or was it already too weak to recover? You're slipping past a temple where priests burn herbs, claiming it'll purify the air. The mobs split. Some pray to Christ, others to Asclepius, but nobody trusts the state to save them. You recall the debased coins and unpaid legions. Now, with tax rolls shrinking and workers dead, the empire's coffers are drier than a desert. The system's collapsing under its own weight, and you're betting the plagues are speeding up the clock. You pause by a fountain, its water stagnant, reflecting a city that's lost its shine. The mob's thinner, and those left are angry, blaming emperors, foreigners, or Christians for the sickness. You overhear a merchant whisper that the armies hit hardest. Legions are down to half strength, unable to guard the frontiers you marched along. It's a vicious cycle. Fewer soldiers mean more raids, less food, and more disease. You chuckle, thinking how a modern hashtag like hashtag plague life would trend in Rome. But the humor sours when you see a cart piled with bodies, headed for a mass grave. The streets grow darker as you move on, the silence broken by a distant wail. Rome's always bounced back, but this feels different. The plagues aren't just killing people, they're killing hope. You think of the forum's golden days, now a fevered memory. The empire's core is rotting, and you're not sure it can heal. Christians talk of salvation, but right now, survival's the only God anyone's chasing. You're betting the next wave will hit harder, and Rome's running out of strength to fight. For now, you slip into an alley, the weight of a dying city heavy in the air you breathe. You're standing on a windswept hill overlooking Constantinople, its gleaming domes and walls rising like a new dawn in the east. It's the late 4th century AD, and the Roman Empire's splitting like a cracked amphora. You turn back toward the west, where Rome's crumbling under the weight of its own decay. The empire's been divided into east and west, and you're caught in the widening rift, watching Constantinople thrive while Rome fades. The air's sharp with sea salt and ambition, but there's a bitter undertone. Rome's no longer the heart of its own story, and you're sensing the end of an era. The mainstream fact is that Emperor Constantine's establishment of Constantinople in 330 AD as the eastern capital formalized the empire's division, shifting power eastward. The Western Empire, centered in Rome, and later Ravenna, struggled with invasions and poverty, while the East grew richer, its trade routes buzzing with silk and spices. You're gazing at Constantinople's bustling port, where ships unload goods from Asia, a stark contrast to the West's faltering markets. The East's armies are better funded, its cities fortified, and you're wondering if Rome's pride can survive being the empire's poorer half. It's like watching a sibling outshine you at every turn. Here's a quirky tidbit. Constantinople's residents loved chariot races so much that riots over team rivalries, like the Blues versus Greens, could topple emperors. Archaeologists have uncovered massive hippodrome stands, proof of the city's obsession. You smirk, imagining a Roman scrolling X, posting, "Blues stand for life, greens are trash," had chariot drama. But this frenzy wasn't just fun. It showed the East's vibrant energy, while the West's Colosseum sat half empty, its gladiators unpaid. The East was building a future, while the West clung to a fading past, like a senator hoarding debased coins. Historians still argue whether the East-West split saved or doomed the empire. Did it let the East thrive by cutting loose the West's dead weight? Or did it fracture Rome's unity beyond repair? You're walking Constantinople's streets, dodging merchants and monks, their confidence palpable. The East's embracing Christianity, with grand churches dwarfing pagan temples. Unlike the West's uneasy balance, you recall the plagues ravaging Rome's core. Constantinople's not immune, but its wealth cushions the blow. The West's legions, underfunded and overrun, can't match the East's disciplined troops. It's a tale of two Romes, and you're betting the West's losing. You pause by a massive wall, part of Constantinople's defenses, built to repel the barbarians you saw probing the frontiers. The West's forts, crumbling and understaffed, are no match. You think of the Forum's golden statues, now looted or neglected, and the garum that once fueled Rome's markets, now a luxury the West can't afford. The East's bureaucracy, while bloated, runs smoother, collecting taxes to fund armies and aqueducts. You chuckle, picturing a Western governor whining, "Why can't we have nice walls like Constantinople?" But the joke's hollow. Rome's pride is bleeding out, and the East's not sharing. As dusk settles, Constantinople's lights flicker, a beacon of what Rome once was. You hear a priest's chant, blending Greek and Latin, a sign of the East's hybrid vigor. The West, stubborn in its traditions, feels like a fading echo. The empire's not one anymore. It's two, and the divide's growing. You're not sure how long the West can limp along, but you're certain it's no match for the East's shine. For now, You turn from the city, the weight of a fracturing empire heavy in your steps. You're crouched behind a shattered statue in Rome's once proud forum. The air thick with smoke and the screams of a city under siege. It's 410 AD, and the Visigoths, led by Alaric, are storming the eternal city, their torches casting an eerie glow on crumbling walls. You hear the crash of bronze gates and the clatter of looted treasures being dragged through streets you once walked in awe. Rome, the untouchable heart of an empire, is being sacked, and you're witnessing its humiliation, a fall from grace that shakes the world. The grandeur you knew is bleeding out, and you're just trying to stay alive in the chaos. The mainstream fact is that the sack of Rome by the Visigoths in 410 AD was a shocking blow, the first time in 800 years that a foreign enemy breached the city's walls. Alaric's forces looted for 3 days, stripping temples and villas of gold, silver, and relics. You're watching a Visigoth warrior pry a golden candelabrum from a temple, his laughter echoing as citizens flee. The empire's western half, already weakened by plagues and bankrupt legions, couldn't stop this. Rome's aura of invincibility, built on centuries of conquest, shatters like the marble under your feet. You're wondering if the city can ever recover its pride. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Visigoths spared Rome's Christian churches, thanks to Alaric's own Christian leanings, a nod to the faith you saw rising in Constantinople. Archaeologists have found records suggesting locals hid treasures in church basements, banking on this mercy. You smirk, imagining a Roman noble stuffing his garum jars under an altar, whispering, "Jesus, save my fish sauce." But this small mercy didn't soften the blow. Rome's pagan elite saw the sack as punishment for abandoning old gods, while Christians blamed imperial sin. Either way, the city's spirit is as broken as its gates. Historians still argue whether the 410 sack was a fatal wound or a symptom of Rome's terminal decline. Was it the barbarian strength or Rome's internal rot, corrupt officials, unpaid soldiers that let Alaric waltz in? You're dodging a burning timber, recalling the debased coins and deserted frontiers you saw. The Western Empire's armies were shadows, too weak to stop a determined foe. You overhear a fleeing senator curse the Eastern Empire for not sending aid. Constantinople's thriving, but it's left Rome to fend for itself. The east-west divide you felt on that hill is now a chasm, and Rome's paying the price. You slip into an alley, heart pounding as Visigoth hooves thunder nearby. The mob's in panic, some praying to Christ, others to Jupiter, but no god's answering tonight. You think of the forum's golden days, its statues now toppled or stolen, the Colosseum silent, its games long canceled for lack of funds. Rome's not just losing treasure, it's losing its myth. You chuckle bitterly, picturing a modern headline: Eternal City gets eternal L. How Rome burns. But the humor fades as you see a child clutching a broken doll, abandoned in the stampede. This isn't just a sack, it's a wound to Rome's soul. The fires rage on, and you're betting the Visigoths won't stay long. They're nomads, not conquerors, but the damage is done. Rome's no longer the world's capital. It's a trophy for barbarians to brag about. You recall the plagues, the unpaid legions, the emperors who fell like dominoes. They all led here, to a city too weak to stand. As dawn nears, the looting slows, but the silence is worse. Rome's still standing, but it's hollow, and you're not sure it's eternal anymore. For now, you huddle in the shadows, the weight of a fallen city, heavy in the smoky air. You're standing in Ravenna's marshy outskirts, the air damp and heavy with the scent of salt water and fading glory. It's 476 AD, and you're witnessing the strange, quiet final hours of the Western Roman Empire. The imperial palace, a pale shadow of Rome's grandeur, looms nearby, its mosaics chipped and its guards listless. A boy emperor, Romulus Augustulus, barely 15, sits on a throne he doesn't understand, his title as hollow as the empire he rules. You're here at the end, watching Rome's greatness unravel, not with a bang, but with a whimper, as a barbarian warlord decides the fate of an empire. The world's holding its breath, and you're wondering if anyone will notice when it's over. The mainstream fact is that 476 AD marks the traditional fall of the Western Roman Empire, when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustulus, ending centuries of imperial rule in the West. You're outside the palace, where Odoacer's men, a mix of Heruli and Skiri, demand the boy step down. There's no battle, no siege, just a quiet handover. The empire's too broke, too fragmented to resist. You recall the Visigoths sacking Rome, the plagues, the unpaid legions. All those cracks have led here to a moment so understated it feels like a clerical error. Rome's not even the capital anymore. Ravenna's a backwater, and you're betting nobody's cheering for this emperor anyway. Here's a quirky tidbit. Romulus Augustulus, named after Rome's mythical founder, was pensioned off to a villa in Campania, possibly living out his days in comfort. Archaeologists have found traces of such estates, suggesting Odoacer didn't bother killing him. Why waste a sword on a kid? You smirk, imagining Romulus as history's most ironic intern, ruling an empire for a year before being sent to a cushy retirement. But this mercy underscores the anticlimax. Rome's end wasn't a barbarian bloodbath, but a bureaucratic shrug. The garum jars are empty, the legions gone, and you're left with a boy who never had a chance. Historians still argue whether 476 was the true fall or just a symbolic marker. Was Rome already dead? Its systems collapsed? Or did Odoacer's act snap the final thread? You're watching the imperial insignia, crown, scepter, be packed up, sent to Constantinople, as if they're outdated props. Odoacer declares himself king of Italy, not emperor, and you sense the shift. Rome's myth is over. The Eastern Empire, thriving under its new name, Byzantium, barely blinks. You think of Constantinople's gleaming walls, a world away from this soggy marsh. The West's been abandoned, and you're not sure if it's betrayal or just survival. You slip closer to the palace, overhearing a scribe mutter about taxes. Nobody's paid them in years. The mob's quiet, too tired for riots, their bread long gone. You recall the form's golden statues, now melted down or lost, and the Christian hymns that drowned out pagan chants. Rome's been dying for centuries, but this feels final, like closing a book nobody reads anymore. You chuckle, picturing a modern ex-post. Western Rome just logged off. GG no re. History over. But the humor fades as you see Romulus, a scared kid in a too big toga, led away. He's not the villain, just the last name on a crumbling list. The sky's gray, matching the mood. Odoacer's men don't loot. They just take over, blending Roman law with their own. You're betting the locals won't notice much change. Life's been hard for ages. But something's gone, something bigger than emperors or armies. Rome's idea, its eternal promise, is slipping into history's shadow. You feel it in the silence, heavier than any sack or plague. The West's done, and you're standing at the edge of a new, uncertain world. As the sun dips, you turn from Ravenna, its marshes swallowing the last echoes of empire. Your steps are slow, the ground soft beneath you. The world's changing, and you're drifting with it. Let the night come now, soft and quiet, like a blanket over what was. A story fades, but yours doesn't. Sleep on that, and let tomorrow bring new dreams. Whispered tales of empires linger, but for now, rest easy, wrapped in the hum of history's end.